Welcome to our Piano Debut video training course. In the last video, we covered pages 5 to 11, where we showed our students how to create a music vision board. In this video, we will cover pages 12 to 15, History of Classical Music. Students preparing for exams will be examined on the history of classical music. It's important to learn about the characteristics for each musical period and some of the famous composers from each period. Learning about the history of classical music will help students have a deeper understanding on how to interpret classical music and perform it well. Here are some of the top influential classical music composers. There are 4 periods in the history of Western classical music: Baroque, Classical, Romantic, and Modern. I will cover the most important characteristics for each music period. Let's start with the Baroque period. The Baroque period was from the 1600s to 1750s. When performing music from the Baroque period, try to create a sound that is like the harpsichord. The piano was not invented yet during this time. The harpsichord and clavichord were the main instruments used. In the next video, we will cover the history of the piano. It's important to understand what instrument the composer used to compose the piece of music we are performing. Baroque music usually expresses one mood or emotion. Terrace dynamics were used to show sudden dynamic contrasts. To help express one mood, the rhythmic patterns introduced at the beginning of the piece were repeated throughout. After melodies were established, these were repeated several times in sequences. A sequence is a repeating phrase at lower or higher pitches. The texture was polyphonic, which meant 2 or more melodies playing simultaneously. An idea in one voice is soon repeated in another voice. There was frequent use of musical ornaments. Some of the famous composers in the Baroque period were Bach, Scarlatti, Handel, Couperin, and Telemann. The classical period was from the 1750s to 1825. When performing music from the classical period, try to show more contrast in dynamics for a dramatic effect. The main instrument used was the pianoforte instead of the harpsichord and clavichord. Some of the characteristics of the classical period were light and elegant mood, lots of contrast to provide sudden dramatic contrasts of character. These contrasts can happen from one movement or another and also within a single work. Dynamics used were crescendos, decrescendos, and sudden accents to add drama and unexpected climaxes. There was a lot of syncopation, abrupt changes from long to short note values and pauses in the rhythm. The melody was balanced. Melodies are easy to sing and not as ornamented as Baroque melodies. The Alberti bass was popular. The texture of classical music was homophonic, which meant music had melody and accompaniment. Some of the famous classical composers were Haydn, Beethoven, Clementi, Mozart, and Schubert. Mozart used the Alberti bass often, so it's important to understand how to play the Alberti bass well. Alberti bass is a broken chord with a very specific pattern of low note, high note, middle note, high note, played repetitively by the left hand on the keyboard or piano composition. The Romantic period was from 1825 to 1900s. When performing music from the Romantic period, it's important to create the right mood from the first note. Bring out the melody clearly. Create an image or story in your mind related to the mood. This can help you express extreme emotion. In the Romantic period, each composer developed their own unique style. Classical rules and barriers were abandoned. A range of dynamics, tempo, and pitch was expanded. Music expressed extreme emotions and moods in the Romantic period, from happiness to desperation and joy to grief. Some new instrumental techniques were developed to achieve various effects. New chords and dissonances were used more freely than the classical era. Use of chromatic harmony. The rhythm and harmony was more complex. Miniature pieces were popular, often grouped in collections. Other developments in the period include program music, music that tells a story, inspired by a story, poem, scene, or character. Nationalism. Composers started to include folk melodies, dances, and stories to give a sense of national identity and pride. Some of the famous Romantic composers were Brahms, Chopin, Debussy, Tchaikovsky, and Schumann. The modern period was from 1900s to present. Some of the characteristics of the modern period are complex rhythms that had irregular, unusual, and unpredictable patterns, changing time signatures within a piece. The Romantic rules were abandoned. The melody contained large leaps and is not always the most important part of the piece. There were new chord structures and polychords developed. Greater use of dissonance with complicated harmonies. There was a development of new instrumental techniques to help composers express themselves in a new way. Unusual and noise-like sounds, instruments used in percussive ways, and the percussion instruments were used more. Other developments were non-Western music. It was influenced by folk music from European and Asian countries. Many composers were inspired by the instruments, harmonies, and rhythms. Some famous modern period composers are Arnold Schoenberg, Charles Ives, Sergei Prokofiev, Igor Stravinsky, and Aaron Copland. In the next video, we will cover the history of the piano. Our series of piano books are a collection of teaching methods and strategies I've developed for students over 20 years of teaching and performing. Our 3 books are suitable for beginner piano students who are interested in learning for leisure or exams online. Book 1 is an easy-to-follow piano method book. Book 2 is a guide to mastering piano technique. Book 3, Piano Debut, is the guide to preparing for solo performances, duets, exams, and group performances. Download a free copy of the book today from our website and join us in our upcoming video tutorials where I will take you on a journey through the world of music performance. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.